The gavel fell, and 6 children's fates were up for sale. But no one expected the man in black to buy them all. There are days when a man's fate drops like a judge's gavel, cold, final, with no warning at all. 6 orphaned children stood before a crowd that didn't care, thinking they'd be split up for good. But when a man in black quietly outbid them all, every eye in town froze. From that moment, the old rules were shattered, and a chase between darkness and hope began. The sun burned down on Redemption Fork, a town so parched the ground cracked like old leather, dust rising with every step as if the land itself tried to hide its shame. By the warped porch of the courthouse, 6 children stood in a line, the numbers scrawled in white chalk on their wrists, nearly washed away by sweat and fear. There was Abigail, Abby, her hair pulled tight and her jaw set, older than her 11 years, and twice as stubborn. Next to her stood Jessie, her twin, wild-eyed and bristling like a pup raised on warnings. Finn, 9, with his chin tucked to his chest, but never quite beaten. Ellie, just 8, watched the crowd with the stillness of a trapped fawn. Little Will, 6, clung to Rose, only 5, small as a sparrow but fierce in her silence. No music, no laughter, just the restless cough of the wind and the scrape of boots on dry boards. The townsfolk came, widows in black shawls, ranchers with dirt under their nails, men too tired to look anyone in the eye. They studied the children the way you'd study a yearling, for strength, for trouble, for something worth taking home. The sheriff called the roll, his voice flat and bored. Ellie, age 8, knows her letters, makes a good fire. A ranchwoman nodded, holding up $2. Someone else called out 3, sold with a slap of the gavel. Ellie blinked, jaw trembling, but she did not break. Abby squeezed her hand before letting go. Jessie stepped forward. Strong arms knows his way around a barn, the sheriff said, as if it mattered. $1, grunted a farmhand. 2. The bids barely rose, but the gavel fell anyway. Jessie didn't flinch, not even when the winning bidder wouldn't meet his gaze. Finn's turn. 9, carries water, listens well. A voice from the back. I'll give $1. Silence. Sold. Finn didn't even look up. Abby felt Rose's hand shaking, sweat slick on her palm. Hold tight, Rosie, she whispered. We'll stick together. But Rose was tiny, half-starved, eyes too old for a girl her size. When the sheriff called her name, the crowd hesitated. Nobody bid. The silence was worse than 100 cruel words. Abby stepped forward, her voice sharp as broken glass. Take me and her both. I'll cook, I'll clean. She won't be any trouble. A few women shook their heads. Don't need more mouths, one muttered, cold and final. Will was called next. 6, runs fast, handy with chores. A man with a drooping hat held up 2 fingers. Sold. Piece by piece they were carved away, like slices off a loaf no one wanted to finish. Abby's heart beat so hard she thought her ribs might crack. The judge looked weary, the sun angling low across his desk. He raised the gavel again. Then a voice from the edge of the square. I'll take them, all of them. Heads turned. Standing in the settling dusk was a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, dust coating his coat and hat. His eyes were hard and cold, a man shaped by storms. The sheriff's hand drifted to his belt. Ain't how this goes, mister. Name your price, the stranger said, and his voice made the air colder. In gold, if you must. He flipped a coin onto the judge's table. It rang out like a gunshot. The judge hesitated, but the coin caught the last light of day, and that seemed to decide it. All 6, then, he murmured, for a fair sum. No one challenged it. Abby's hope rose and twisted, sharp, hot, almost painful. The man came forward, boots heavy on cracked earth, and met each child's eyes with something between sorrow and promise. I know their names, he told the sheriff, who frowned, unsure. Coins changed hands. The townfolk faded away. Abby gathered her siblings, Rose pressed to her side, Jessie blinking hard, Will clutching her sleeve. For the first time in hours, nobody reached for them. The stranger watched, neither kind nor cruel, just resolute, the sort of man who'd seen hell and learned to walk through it. When the last of the sunlight left Redemption Fork, 6 children and 1 silent man walked together down the dusty road, their shadows trailing long behind. The stranger's name was Jonah Beckett, though no one in Redemption Fork had ever heard it spoken before. He led the children, his coat trailing dust, his shadow swallowing theirs, along the edge of town to a place called the Longhorn Inn, a battered clapboard building leaning into the wind. The sign above the door creaked, paint peeling, but the lamp inside glowed warm. The innkeeper, Mrs. Eula Bright, eyed them all with suspicion as Jonah paid for 2 rooms, one for boys, one for girls, laying gold coins on the counter like he'd just dug them from the riverbed. Abby lingered at the threshold, every muscle tense. She had spent so long bracing for pain that comfort now felt like a trick. Rose hung from her arm. Will hovered at her side, and Jessie, normally so brash, stayed silent, studying Jonah with wary respect. That night they slept in beds for the first time in weeks, the mattress thin but softer than earth. Yet sleep was a stubborn thing. Abby lay awake, the sounds of the inn whispering around her. Floorboards creaked, a coyote howled far off, and the wind rattled the window with dry fingers. She pressed her palm against Rose's back, feeling each breath steady and slow, and thought of Mama's voice telling stories by firelight. Downstairs, through the cracks in the floorboards, voices drifted. Up, a man's low and rough, a woman's tense. Abby caught snatches of words. Ain't charity, it's a promise. You don't owe them nothing, Beckett. That's where you're wrong. She pressed her ear harder, but the voices faded, lost to clatter and wind. Later, a fever seized Rose, her skin burning, lips dry as cracked clay. Abby panicked, memories of sickness stealing little ones from poor cabins sharper than any knife. She ran to Jonah's door, knocking with her fist, voice trembling. She's sick, please. Jonah answered, quick, no boots, coat thrown over one shoulder. His face, usually hard, softened at the sight of Rose curled tight in Abby's arms. Without a word, he fetched a pouch from his saddlebag, roots and dried flowers bundled in brown paper. Steep this in hot water, he instructed, voice quiet but sure. Your mother believed in this stuff. Abby looked up, startled. How do you know what Mama believed? He didn't answer, only poured water into the cup. His hands steady as old stone. He waited until Rose swallowed the bitter brew, then pressed a cool cloth to her brow. She'll be right by morning. He said it like a promise he'd keep, even if the sun didn't rise. Elsewhere in the inn, rumors flared. Some whispered that Jonah Beckett was a fugitive, others that he'd once been a lawman. A few swore he was cursed, a man who'd buried everyone he ever loved. The townsfolk eyed him and the children with equal suspicion, muttering about what kind of man buys orphans in bulk and pays in gold. After midnight, Jesse slipped from his room, padding silent down the hallway. He crouched at the top of the stairs, half hidden in shadow, and listened. In the kitchen below, Jonah sat with 2 men, faces unfamiliar, the kind of men who spoke in short, clipped tones. Silas McVeigh's not gonna let this stand, one said. He claims the children as payment. He claims a lot he don't own, Jonah replied. That don't change what's right. The talk shifted low, urgent. You made a deal? No, I made a promise. Jesse's heart hammered. He slid back to bed, mind reeling. As dawn broke, Abby found Jonah sitting on the porch, sharpening a knife, slow and steady. She sat beside him, hands folded tight. "Why us?" she asked at last, her voice barely more than breath. Jonah looked out at the waking street, at the cattle dust rising and the sun painting the roofs gold. "Because you still got a chance," he said. "Not many folks left in this world can say that." That afternoon, as Rose's fever broke and the children gathered at the window, a figure appeared on the far side of Main Street, broad hat pulled low, long coat dusty, boots black as midnight. He watched the inn with flat, empty eyes before turning away. Abby caught the look, felt a tremor of warning. The townsfolk kept their distance, and Mrs. Bright muttered that trouble always comes in threes. Before supper, Jesse pulled Abby aside. "There's men asking about us," he whispered. "They say a name, Silas McVeigh." Abby's breath caught. That name had the taste of blood and burnt wood. That night, as the children tried to sleep, a shadow lingered outside their window, boots crunching on gravel. Abby pressed Rose to her chest and whispered, "We stay quiet." We stay together. In the darkness, Jonah stood guard, silent, watchful, a storm gathering behind his eyes. The first step to freedom had been taken, but in Redemption Fork, nothing was ever truly given. It was only ever bought or paid for or stolen away in the dark. Night in the Longhorn Inn pressed close as a heavy blanket, air thick with sweat and dust, the lamps burning low. Jonah took the corner room, posted himself by the window, every sense sharpened. The children huddled together across the narrow hall. Abby couldn't sleep. She kept one arm over Rose, her fingers curled so tight the knuckles turned white. Will whimpered once in his dreams, but didn't wake. Jonah's boots never left the floor. He sat at the edge of his bed, gun cleaned, knife within reach. Downstairs, the wind rattled the shutters, and every so often a mule brayed in the dark yard. Jesse was the first to slip from the tangle of quilts, creeping to the doorway. "Can't sleep," he whispered to Abby. "Feels like the world's holding its breath." Abby nodded. She couldn't tell if the fear came from the unfamiliar bed, the town's silence, or the man sleeping only 2 doors away. The fear, she realized, was not of Jonah himself, but the shadows that seemed to follow him. A sudden cough from Rose, sharp, dry, then a fevered gasp. Abby panicked, fumbling for water. She pressed her palm to Rose's brow. Too hot, too fast. Abby dashed from the room, barefoot on cold planks, and found Jonah in the hall, already awake, face carved in moonlight. "She's burning up," Abby choked, desperation cracking her voice. Jonah didn't ask questions. He took Rose from Abby's arms, set her on the kitchen table, and rummaged through his battered satchel for a bundle of roots and dried flowers. "You trust me?" he said quietly. Abby nodded, though she could not speak. He brewed the herbs in boiling water, coaxed the steam to Rose's lips, held her until she calmed. The room filled with the scent of sage and wild mint. "Your mother knew these remedies," Jonah said, voice softer than before. Abby stared, searching for a lie, but found only tired kindness. "She was a good woman," he added. "Helped me once, long ago, when nobody else would." Abby blinked back tears. She wanted to ask, "How do you know her? Who are you to us?" But fear closed her throat. She took Rose's hand instead. That night, Rose's fever broke, sweat beading on her brow, color returning to her cheeks. Downstairs, voices crept through the cracks. The innkeeper muttered about bad omens and a house full of orphans. Townsfolk circled the porch, peering through smoky glass, trading stories and suspicions. "No man buys 6 mouths unless he's hiding something," a rancher grumbled. "Mark my words, that Beckett's got blood on his boots." Near midnight, footsteps crept along the porch. Slow, deliberate, the tread of men who'd done harm before. Jesse peered through the keyhole, breath caught in his throat. Shadows flickered past, then a sharp click at the doorknob. Abby tensed, ready to scream. The door burst open. Jonah stood, gun drawn, his voice low and cold as winter. "You want trouble? You found it." The intruders froze. A pair of drifters, eyes wild, hands empty. "We just wanted to talk, mister, just talk." Jonah's stare held them like a trap. "Leave, now." They stumbled back into the night, faces pale as bone. The children pressed close, fear choking any sleep. Abby asked, "Are we safe?" Jonah knelt, his shadow long and strange in the lamplight. "You're safe as I can make you," he said. "But in this town, that may not be much." He tucked his coat around Rose and pressed the tin of fever weed into Abby's hand. "You're stronger than you know," he told her. Outside, thunder rolled on a horizon that never seemed to get closer. Inside, Abby stroked Rose's hair, watched Jesse and Will fall into exhausted sleep, and promised herself she'd keep them together no matter what storms the next day brought. By dawn, the children woke to Jonah standing at the door, eyes already on the dusty street, his presence a warning and a promise that no one would take them without a fight. Morning broke slow, a red haze smearing across the empty lots and half-shuttered windows of Redemption Fork. The air hung heavy with the promise of heat. In the cramped-in room, the children dressed in silence, each one sensing the change. The innkeeper's sideways glances, the hushed voices downstairs, the way the townsfolk now crossed the street to avoid their window. Even the sun felt sharper, as if it meant to burn the truth out of anyone who lingered. Abby watched from the curtain's edge, heart thudding in her chest. She caught sight of Jonah out on the porch, sharpening his knife, back straight as a fence post. But it was the way he looked at the passing wagon, at the three men standing too long at the crossroads, that made her skin crawl. He knew something. Maybe he always had. Jesse had gone silent. He spent the morning at the back steps, pretending to fix the broken latch. But really, he was listening. That's how he heard them. Voices muffled, urgent. "Silas wants 'em back. Pay good coin for each head. Beckett's just buying time." Another voice lower, meaner. "If he runs, we cut him off at Dust Devil Pass." Jesse ducked behind the barrels, pulse racing, and watched as the men melted back into the shadows. He hurried upstairs, breathless, and pulled Abby aside. "They're coming for us. They're working for Silas McVeigh." Abby stared, disbelief and dread warring inside her. "How do you know?" "Heard them. They said Jonah can't protect us forever." At noon, the innkeeper brought bread and salt pork, her hands trembling. She leaned in, voice barely a whisper. "You best leave soon. McVeigh's men, they don't bother with questions." Jonah said nothing, just nodded, jaw tight. That night the unease grew heavier, suffocating. Ellie clung to Will, who tried to act brave, and Rose curled into Abby's lap, thumb in her mouth. Abby studied Jonah in the lamplight, how he moved, how he seemed to know each child's fear, how he called them by name before they ever spoke. She remembered him setting the water for Rose's tea without asking. The way he looked at the old photograph in his wallet sometimes when he thought no one saw. Something didn't fit. She found the courage to ask, "How do you know so much about us?" Jonah's eyes flickered, shadows passing over. "Your father and I fought side by side once. I made a promise, Abby, one I aim to keep." Before she could reply, footsteps sounded on the porch. Jonah motioned for silence, slipped the pistol from his coat, and pressed a finger to his lips. The doorknob rattled once, twice. Then a shoulder thudded against the wood. Abby's heart slammed in her chest. Jesse clutched a fire iron, knuckles white. The children held their breath as the door shook on its hinges. Jonah's voice cut the darkness, low and cold. "You take one more step, you'll find hell waiting." The struggle stopped. Heavy silence hung, then retreating boots thudded down the stairs. No one spoke for a long time after. Later, Abby couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and tried to recall her father's voice, but all she could remember was Jonah's. Rough, weary, but steady. She wondered if trust was something you earned, or just something you had to risk. As dawn crept in, the sound of horses and angry voices echoed from the street. Silas McVeigh had come to Redemption Fork. Long before the sun cleared the low roofs of Redemption Fork, Jonah was awake, packing up what little they had: blankets, dried bread, the battered tin of fever weed. He moved with a quiet urgency, the sort that made even the youngest understand. There was no time for goodbyes. The children dressed in the half-dark, fumbling with laces and buttons, silent but wide-eyed. Abby wrapped Rose in her shawl, heart pounding so loud she feared it would rattle the windows. Jessie kept watch at the cracked window, every so often whispering, "They're still there." Two men in long coats loitered by the water trough, their hats pulled low. A third circled the back alley. Abby saw Silas McVeigh himself once, astride a red horse, pale eyes raking the street. The air outside tasted like thunder and old regrets. Jonah herded the children down the back stairs. The innkeeper pressed a crust of bread into Abby's hands, eyes soft with pity. "God go with you," she whispered. The world outside was all shadow, streets empty but for stray dogs and the ghosts of last night's fear. Jonah led them to an old wagon, paint peeling, a patchwork of repairs holding it together. "Stay low," he ordered. Abby, Jessie, Will, Finn, Ellie, and Rose squeezed in, barely breathing. Jonah cracked the reins, and the wagon lurched towards the edge of town. No one looked back. They rattled along the main road, then veered onto a narrow track cutting between dying cottonwoods. The sound of hooves followed, a whisper at first, then a threat. Will caught it first. "Jonah," he whispered, voice tight, "someone's coming." Jonah's jaw flexed. "Keep quiet." The horses behind picked up speed. At the edge of Coyote Ridge, Jonah steered them off the path, down a dry creek bed choked with brush. Abby hugged Rose, eyes fixed on the jagged sky. They pulled up at a rotting way station. Roof half collapsed, walls scorched from some old fire. "Inside," Jonah ordered. Abby, nerves fraying, slipped from the wagon and crept behind a barrel. Something stuck out from beneath the tarp in Jonah's pack, a battered photograph, a folded letter, the name Sarah written on yellowed paper. She started to reach for it, but a rifle shot cracked the stillness, splintering the doorframe above her head. The children screamed, ducked low. Dust and wood rained from the rafters. Jonah moved fast, faster than any man his age should. He shoved the children behind an overturned table, drew his revolver, and returned fire into the blinding sunlight. "Get down," he barked. Bullets punched through the thin walls, the sound almost lost in the thunder of their own heartbeats. Abby grabbed Will and Ellie, pulling them close. Finn curled in a corner, hands over his ears. Jessie crawled toward the back, searching for an escape, a miracle, anything. Rose whimpered, clutching Abby's sleeve. Jonah reloaded, eyes hard as iron. "Listen to me. When I say run, you run for that back door. Don't wait for me. You hear?" Abby nodded, terrified. The firing outside paused, a shouted command, the scrape of boots on gravel. Jonah counted under his breath, 1, 2, 3, then kicked open the rear exit, firing 2 shots. "Now!" he roared. The children scrambled after him, sunlight stabbing their eyes. Someone grabbed at Jessie. Abby swung the old photograph, slapping the attacker's face. Jonah pulled her free, shoved them all toward a narrow ravine hidden by tumbleweeds. More shots rang out. The wagon, left behind, caught fire, smoke curling black against the sky. The last thing Abby saw as she stumbled into the ditch was Jonah's face, jaw clenched, coat torn by gunfire, but his eyes steady, fixed on the horizon. As night fell, the only sound was the ragged breath of 7 fugitives pressing onward into darkness, and the distant roar of a town that would never welcome them back. Thunderheads piled up above the ridges, turning dusk to iron. Jonah led the children through a maze of gullies and sagebrush, the kind of wild land only outcasts and coyotes remembered. The path grew steeper, shadows lengthening until the night swallowed all color. Every crack of a branch, every scurry in the brush made the children jump. Jesse counted their steps. Will muttered prayers, Ellie clung to Finn, and Abby whispered to Rose, "We keep moving, honey, just a little further." Behind them, hoofbeats echoed, close, then gone, then closer again. Silas McVeigh's men hunted with the patience of wolves. At the mouth of a narrow canyon, Jonah raised his hand, stopping them short. "We make our stand here. No one runs, no one gets left behind." His words, flat and final. The first shot came sudden, splintering rock above Abby's head. Bullets rained in bursts, dirt spitting up around their feet. Jonah dragged the children behind a fallen log, eyes scanning for targets. "Jesse, keep your head down. Abby, hold Rose. Will, you watch that flank. No heroics." A voice rang out through the dusk, cruel sing-song, unmistakably Silas. "Hand 'em over, Beckett. This ain't your fight." Jonah fired back, one clean shot, sending a man tumbling from his saddle. "Come get 'em yourself," he shouted. The battle was a blur, men crashing through brush, gunfire splitting the silence, the smell of burned powder thick as old sin. Jesse broke cover to reach Ellie, who'd slipped and fallen. He pulled her back just as a bullet tore through her skirt. Finn shielded Rose with his own small body, trembling but unyielding. Jonah took a graze to the arm, blood soaking his sleeve, but he never faltered. "Stick close," he barked, voice steel. In the chaos, Abby spotted a narrow game trail veering up the ridge. She grabbed Will and Finn, waving them forward. "There! The path!" Jonah covered their escape, gun smoking in his hand. "Move! Move!" The children scrambled over scree and brambles, hearts hammering. Abby carried Rose, stumbling but never letting go. Jesse and Will hauled Ellie between them. Finn, white-faced and shaking, didn't let himself fall. As the last light bled from the sky, Jonah signaled to Abby, an old trail he'd once dug himself, half hidden by rocks. "Go, follow the cut, don't look back." He fired one last time, clipping a pursuer's hat, then ducked into the shadows, herding the children up the switchback. The gunfire faded, replaced by wind and the distant baying of angry men left behind. At the crest, the group collapsed, gasping, skin scraped raw but alive. Jonah bound his arm in silence, eyes darting over the children, counting, always counting. Abby wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. She looked at Jonah, bleeding, breathing hard, but standing between them and the dark. In that moment she saw not just the stranger who'd bought them, but the only shield they had left in a world gone ruthless. Above them, the storm finally broke, cold rain washing the blood and dust from their faces. In the shelter of a stunted pine, they huddled close, Jonah's voice low and steady. "We made it through one more night. That's how you live out here. One night at a time." Lightning flashed, thunder rolled, and the wild heart of the West drummed a warning. Nothing given, everything earned. They took shelter in a forgotten shack, pressed into the edge of the pines, its boards warped, windows soot-stained from fires long gone. The mountain air was sharp, alive with the scent of wet dirt and wood smoke. Jonah patched his bleeding arm, grimacing but silent, while Abby and Jesse built a fire, hands trembling. Will wiped mud from Rose's cheek with a gentleness far beyond his years. Ellie shivered in Finn's arms, her torn skirt a reminder of how close she'd come to being lost. The night was thick with quiet, the kind that makes old hurts surface. Abby sat across from Jonah, studying the hard line of his jaw, the shadows under his eyes. The question in her chest burned. Why us? Why now? She waited until the fire crackled low before she spoke, voice barely more than a whisper. "Who are you really, Jonah Beckett? And what do you owe our family?" The others listened, breath held. Jonah stared into the flames for a long while, letting the silence press down until it hurt. Finally he spoke, slow, every word heavy with regret. Your daddy and I rode together, not always for the law. We did what we had to, back before the railroad, before lawmen came this far. I made a choice once, one that broke your family apart. I walked away when I should have stood. Your pa paid with his life. Your ma paid with her heart. I swore I'd never run from the debt. When word came she'd passed, I figured it was time to pay up, best I could. Abby's voice trembled, rage and sorrow fighting in her chest. So this is just penance. You saving us, it's about clearing your conscience. Jonah shook his head, slow and tired. No child should pay for a grown man's mistakes. I can't change what's gone, but I can stand in the way of what's coming. A gust of wind rattled the shack. Jesse sat up straighter, eyes glistening with understanding. Maybe forgiveness, maybe not. Will watched Jonah, jaw set, as if measuring the worth of a man who admitted to breaking instead of saving. The night stretched, uneasy. Finn pressed his head against the wall, eyes wide open, listening for footsteps that didn't come. Rose, exhausted, curled up beside Abby and whispered, "I miss Mama." Ellie reached out, her small hand closing around Jonah's good hand. "Will you stay this time?" she asked, voice barely a breath. Jonah nodded, something breaking gentle in his face. "I ain't going nowhere, not while you need me." Outside, the rain eased, stars peeking through ragged clouds. In the hush, it wasn't forgiveness that settled, just a truce, and the hard hope that maybe in the wild country, loyalty could be born again. Yet even as sleep claimed the children, Abby lay awake, mind racing with doubt. The man who'd saved them had once left their blood to the wolves. Could she trust him now when every hoofbeat on the wind sounded like another ghost coming to collect? The embers glowed, painting shadows of all they'd lost and all they might still lose before morning. By morning, the wild had washed their faces clean, but no one felt new. Jonah broke camp before sunrise, the shack left behind like another secret best buried. They moved single file through the whispering grass, every step an echo of fear and something like defiance. Abby glanced at the sky, gray and endless, and wondered if safety existed anywhere on this side of the world. They crossed a shallow creek by noon, boots squelching in mud. Jesse lagged behind, always checking their back trail. At a fork in the track, hoofprints appeared, fresh, wide as a man's palm. Jonah slowed, shoulders tense. "We got company. Stay close." Not far up the ridge, a lone rider waited. Woman in a battered hat, long dark braids shot through with copper. Her eyes, flint bright, missed nothing. Sadie Quinn. Half Shoshone, half outlaw, she carried a shotgun slung low and wore her scars where everyone could see them. Her horse shifted, uneasy, sensing the tension that trailed them all. Jonah's hand went to his gun, but Sadie just tipped her hat, voice calm. "Looks like you picked up a stray or six, Beckett." Her smile was wry, her gaze unreadable. "Some folks say you stole them. Others say you saved them. Guess it depends who's paying." Abby stepped forward, chin up, heart wild. "We're not for sale." Sadie's eyes softened, just a flicker. "Didn't say you were, darlin', but there's a price on your heads now. Poster in every town from here to Lost Horse Canyon. Silas wants you back, and he's not the only one." Jonah stiffened. "You runnin' with McVeigh now?" Sadie shook her head. "I hunt my own bounties, but I don't fancy the kind who sell kids. That's not why I'm here." The children watched, silent and wide-eyed. Will's grip tightened on Ellie's shoulder. Rose hid behind Abby's legs. Sadie looked them over, her jaw hard. "Listen, there's a pack of hired guns on your trail. I saw 'em down by Red Bluff. They're mean, bored, and well paid. You go left at the split up ahead, you'll walk right into 'em. You go right, you got a chance." Jonah weighed her words. trust and doubt warring on his face. "Why help us?" Sadie shrugged. "Maybe I remember what it's like to be hunted. Maybe I just hate Silas McVeigh more than I like gold. Either way, the choice is yours." Thunder rumbled. Real this time, not just in their chests. Abby looked at Sadie, then at Jonah. "We can't run forever," she whispered. Sadie grinned. "You're smarter than most. Come on, I'll show you a path even coyotes forgot." They followed Sadie through a hidden ravine, moving quick and low. Twice they heard gunfire in the distance, voices raised in curses. The world seemed to close in, a web of hunger, judgment, and old pain. Sadie never slowed, her steps sure, as if she knew every stone by heart. At dusk, they reached a narrow pass. Sadie paused, shotgun across her lap. "You can go on alone from here, or you can trust me to the end. Just know, ain't nobody in the West gets through without bleeding a little, not even me." Jonah looked at Abby. She met his gaze, and for the first time there was something like hope between them. Behind, the storm broke, cold and hard. Ahead, the wild promised nothing but the truth of themselves. The next morning brought a hush to the hills, the kind of silence that belonged to the half-wild and half-broken. Sadie led them along goat tracks through a pine forest, the air sharp with resin and the earth springy underfoot. Abby carried Rose piggyback, Jessie scouting up ahead, Finn and Will sharing the burden of a battered pack. Ellie walked beside Sadie, listening to the woman's stories about old trails and older betrayals. The trail ended at the edge of a hidden valley, rimmed by aspen and haunted by birdsong. There, tucked among the trees, lay Ghost Hollow, a scatter of cabins and tents patched from canvas and hope. It was a place for the unwanted, exiles, runaways, and those too tired to keep running. Faces peered out as they entered, faces the world had chosen to forget, but not erase. Jonah kept a hand near his gun, but Sadie just nodded to a one-eyed man whittling on the stoop. "All right, Nate, friends this time." Nate grunted but made no move. Within Ghost Hollow, strangers were measured by what they did, not what they'd lost. An old woman handed Abby a bowl of stew. Jessie was pressed into helping repair a fence. Rose curled up beside a stray dog, sleeping deeper than she had in weeks. Ellie and Finn learned to use a sling from a weathered Paiute, their laughter a song above the haunted hush. Jonah sat with Sadie by a smoldering fire, tension easing just enough for weariness to show. "How long you figure we can stay?" he asked. Sadie shrugged, her eyes on the gathering clouds. "Long as the world forgets you're here. Long as Silas don't send a ghost of his own." Night in Ghost Hollow was thick and dreamless, yet even there no place was safe from memory. A torn note slid beneath the cabin door, no signature, just 6 words scrawled in a hasty hand. "You can't outrun what you owe." It was Finn who vanished first. Sometime between dusk and dawn his bed went cold. Abby woke to find his blanket empty, a muddy handprint on the window ledge. Panic was quiet, sharp as a knife in the dark. Jonah and Jessie searched the woods. Sadie checked every path in and out, but Finn was gone, as if the ground itself had swallowed him. When dawn broke, a rider came to Ghost Hollow, face hidden by a scarf, voice flat as winter. "McVeigh's got the boy," he said. "He wants a word with Beckett, or the next one disappears." Abby's heart nearly stopped, her hands fisting the blanket as if it might anchor her to the earth. The wild country gave and took, sometimes in the same breath. Jonah met Abby's gaze across the battered table. There was no blame, only the raw truth that nothing fragile stayed whole for long out here. But even in loss, hope didn't die. In Ghost Hollow, the forgotten learned to gather their pieces and fight for one more dawn. They gathered under the cold light of morning, the hollow holding its breath. Abby clutched Rose to her chest, feeling the little girl's heart race in time with her own. Jessie kicked, at the dirt, anger bright in his eyes. Ellie wept softly into Will's shirt. Even Sadie looked worn, her usual calm cut by a worry she didn't bother to hide. Jonah stood apart, staring at the ransom note Finn's kidnapper had left on the old table. Trade what you stole, or the boy breaks. It wasn't just about the boy anymore. It was the cost of being fragile, of daring to believe someone might stay. Silas McVeigh's name hung over them like thunder. Word had come from a mule driver out of Dry River. McVeigh wants what your pa took in the stagecoach robbery. He knows only Beckett holds the secret. Abby's hands shook as she faced Jonah. Is it true? You know where the money is? Jonah's eyes were heavy, clouded with memory. Your father, he didn't steal for himself. He did it so you kids wouldn't starve. But I hid the stash after so you wouldn't grow up hunted. That's my sin, Abby. That's what Silas wants. Sadie gripped her shotgun. He won't bargain fair. He never has. Abby's jaw tightened. Then I'll do it myself. No one could stop her. That night, Abby, dressed in her father's old coat, left behind in a box beneath the bed. She cut her hair short, tied it with string, armed with nothing but a kitchen knife and her resolve. She slipped out before dawn. Sadie tried to follow, but Abby was quicker. Her whole life, she'd run from trouble. Now she ran into its jaws. The world shrank to the ragged breath in her chest and the ache in her legs as she made for the old sawmill where McVeigh's men waited. Through the brambles she saw Finn, small and shivering, his wrists tied to a post. Silas stood with two gun hands, one thin, one thick as a tree trunk. Abby didn't pause. She crept low, cold sweat slicking her neck, and watched the guards. Their laughter was ugly, careless. When one left to piss in the brush, Abby crawled behind the stacks of timber, her heart thudding so loud she thought it would give her away. She was almost there when a branch cracked beneath her knee. Who's there? The big man swung his lantern. Abby froze, knife in her fist. The man reached for her, but she slashed at his hand and bolted, stumbling toward Finn. Silas's voice boomed, "Bring her here." Abby was grabbed, dragged through the mud, the knife torn away. Silas bent low, his breath rotten with whiskey. "You got my secret, little girl?" Abby spat at his boots, trembling. "I got nothing for you." Silas grinned, baring yellow teeth. "You do now. Let's see how much you'll beg when your brother starts to scream." The moment hung, tight, cruel, a heartbeat from disaster. Then a rifle cracked from the trees. Sadie's voice rang out, "Hands off her, McVeigh. This bounty ends tonight." Abby threw herself at Finn, untied his wrists with shaking fingers as the chaos erupted. Jonah crashed through the underbrush, Jesse and Will flanking from the side, Ellie clutching Rose and shouting for them to run. The forest exploded with gunfire and grit and thunder. For a moment, nothing existed but fear, the taste of blood, the stubborn pulse of hope. Finn sobbed into Abby's shoulder as she shielded him, willing her body to hold out just a little longer. When the smoke cleared, Silas and his men had fled, one wounded and the others scattered like leaves in the wind. Abby fell to her knees, arms locked around Finn, the whole world spinning and new again. But she'd learned. Out here, every act of courage cost something. Fragile things survived only because someone was willing to bleed for them. Night dropped its dark cloak over Ghost Hollow, sharp and silent as a blade. The fires burned low, but hearts ran hotter than the embers. Word came fast. Silas McVeigh was still out there, wounded but wild, calling in debts owed and promises made in blood. Jonah loaded his battered Colt, checked the old Winchester Sadie handed him. Abby stood nearby, hands trembling but eyes hard as flint. Sadie mapped out the rescue on a patch of dirt. They'll hole up in the North Gorge, narrow as a needle's eye. We go before moonrise, one mistake and none of us comes back. Jesse scouted the canyon first, barefoot, ghost quiet. Will kept watch, clutching a stick he'd carved to look like a rifle. Rose sat in Sadie's lap, humming lullabies she half remembered from another life. As the moon climbed, the air changed. Restless, urgent, thick with the taste of old grudges. They moved as one, Jonah leading, Sadie flanking left. Abby in the center with the children pressed close. Finn, still shaken, clung to Abby's coat. At the gorge, shadows twisted in torchlight. Silas's men waited, guns ready, laughter sharp as broken glass. Silas stepped from the dark, face bloodied but grinning wide. "So Beckett brought the whole damn orphanage. Ready to pay what's due." His voice echoed cruelly between the rocks. Jonah stood tall, not flinching. "It ends here, Silas. Let the kids go." Silas leveled his rifle at Abby. "Not a chance. She's the coin. You're just the hand spends it." Abby stepped forward before Jonah could stop her. Her voice was quiet but sure. "If you want someone, take me. Let the others go." The canyon held its breath. For a moment, all that could be heard was the scrape of boots on gravel, the low cry of an owl overhead. Sadie cocked her shotgun, eyes cold. "You want a war, McVeigh? You got it." Bullets tore the silence, fire sparking off stone. Jesse darted between shadows, hurling rocks and curses. Will tackled a guard, earning a split lip and a proud scar. Sadie's aim was true. 2 of Silas's men fell, cursing the day they followed him. Silas grabbed Abby, pressing his gun to her head. "Drop 'em, Beckett, or she dies." Jonah's gun hit the dirt. "You want revenge, Silas? Take it from me, not them." Silas sneered, but his hands shook. Abby whispered, "You're just a man, Silas. Broken men break others, but you can stop here." Her voice, small, trembling, cut deeper than any bullet. For one impossible heartbeat, Silas hesitated. A shot rang out, Sadie's. The gun flew from Silas's grip, clattering down the rocks. Abby yanked free, running to Finn. Jonah lunged, wrestling Silas to the ground. They rolled in the dust, fists and rage, and old regrets. In the end, Silas lay on his back, breath ragged, moonlight silver on his face. "It's never enough," he gasped. "No matter how much you take, it's never enough." Jonah helped Abby to her feet. "We're not running anymore," he said, voice hoarse. Sadie knelt beside Will, cleaning his wound, whispering a song of healing in a tongue older than the land. The fight was over, but the scars would linger. Abby wrapped her arms around the youngest, holding them close as the moon watched from above. Tonight, they survived, but in the wild, dawn was never promised, only earned. When the dust of battle settled, the moon hung heavy over Ghost Hollow, bathing the wounded and the weary in a pale, forgiving light. Silas McVeigh lay propped against a boulder, breathing shallow, his face lined with old bitterness and new pain. Blood soaked his shirt, a stain he couldn't outlive. Sadie crouched beside him, her eyes sharp but not unkind. She pressed a rag to his wound, more out of duty than mercy. Abby knelt nearby, arms around Finn and Rose. The children shivered not from cold, but from the memory of fear. Jesse and Will stood guard, too young for the hardness in their eyes. Jonas sat apart, turning an old silver coin over in his palm, lost in the weight of secrets. Sadie's voice cut the silence. "Tell it now, Beckett. No more ghosts between us." Jonah's hands trembled as he spoke. "I fought with their pa. We dreamed of a stake in the high country, a place for our families. When the railroad came, the law cut men loose, made thieves of those trying to survive. The stagecoach robbery, it was desperation, not greed. We split the money, but I hid it after the law got close. I thought I could keep the kids safe, buy us all another chance. But secrets fester. I ran, left them orphans, and that's my cross to bear." Sadie's gaze softened. "You kept running, but you always turned back. That counts for something." Silas coughed, a dry laugh escaping his cracked lips. You think a little truth changes anything, Beckett? You left me to rot, too. Jonah looked him in the eye. We all lost something. We all did wrong. Maybe it's time to stop bleeding each other dry. It was Rose who broke the standoff, the smallest, the one with the quietest voice. She slipped from Abby's embrace and walked to Silas, eyes wide with innocent defiance. You hurt us, but I don't hate you. I just want to go home. Silas met her gaze, and for a flicker, the old hatred drained away. You're braver than most men I've known, he whispered. Sadie Rose called out to the settlers and outcasts gathered at the edge of the hollow. These children are not loot. They're what's left of hope. You want to build a new world? Start by protecting what's fragile. Jonah opened the old leather pouch and poured out coins, more than most in Ghost Hollow had ever seen. Their father's money, used for food, medicine, books. No more hiding. One by one, the Hollow's people stepped forward. Some offered bandages, others words of forgiveness. For the first time, the orphans weren't just survivors. They were part of something larger than loss. Sadie pulled Abby aside. You did right, not because you fought, but because you forgave. Abby looked to the horizon, a wash of gray light hinting at dawn. Maybe that's what makes us strong out here. Not how hard we fight, but how much we can carry and still choose to stay. Jonah watched as the children huddled together, scars and all. And for the first time in years, he let hope creep in. In the wild, forgiveness was rare, but tonight, beneath the broken moon, it found a place to rest. The sun crept slow and gold over Ghost Hollow, washing the night's sorrows from the ragged land. For the first time in too long, the children woke not to fear, but to the sound of laughter, thin, rusty, but real. Abby led them down to the creek to wash, her fingers running through Rose's tangled hair, the girl giggling at the chill. Jesse and Will wrestled in the dust, Finn skipping stones until his arm ached, Ellie singing softly while Sadie braided flowers into her hair. Jonah was already up, splitting wood for the fire, his limp more pronounced but his eyes easier. The cabin they called home was small and crooked, patched with new boards and old dreams. The roof leaked in 2 places, but the laughter held the walls together stronger than any nails. Sadie made a place for herself, setting up a corner of the room with ink and slate, promising to teach letters and numbers to anyone willing. She was less a guest now, more a guardian, her gentle scolding and sly jokes weaving into the fabric of their days. At dusk, she taught the children to shoot straight and true, not just with bows, but with words, with kindness, with stubborn hope. Jonah sat with Abby on the porch one evening, watching the fireflies blink over the field. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. You forgive easy for a girl who's seen too much, he said, half a smile at the corner of his mouth. Abby shook her head. I don't forget, Jonah. I just get tired of holding on to what hurts. He nodded, looking out over the hills. You kids rebuilt more than this house. You gave me a reason to stick. Will came running, waving a battered book he'd found in the barn. Read to us, Abby. Make it the one about the bear who got lost and found his way. Abby opened the book, her voice clear and steady, the others gathering around her. Rose curled up close and, for the first time, whispered, Mama, against Abby's shoulder. The word sent a hush through the room. Abby's eyes filled, but she held Rose tighter, letting the moment wrap around them like a warm blanket. Later, as the sky grew dark and the stars crowded close, Sadie stepped onto the porch and watched Jonah. You leaving? She asked. He shrugged. Thinking on it. Maybe there's more I can do out there. Sadie nodded, wise and sad. Just remember, sometimes staying is the braver thing. Jonah pressed a letter into Abby's hand before dawn. No long words, just, where I am. You'll always have a place. Then he mounted his horse, disappearing into the thin mist that clung to the fields. Days turned, wounds healed slow, and the house filled with new sounds. Abby humming, Sadie's lessons, Finn's wild stories, the crackle of hope finding its feet. In the garden, tiny green shoots pushed up through the hard earth, fragile and fierce. The children no longer flinched at every shadow. Ghost Hollow was their own, a promise held together by scars, laughter, and the choice to stay. And as the sun broke clean over the valley for the first time, they believed. Maybe freedom wasn't just running. Maybe it was having someone to come back to. Years passed in Ghost Hollow, not in leaps and bounds, but in slow, steady seasons. The land changed shape beneath the wind, and so did the people who called it home. The house stood firmer now, patched with care and memory, each mark in the wood a testament to something survived. Sunlight spilled across the porch where Abby sat mending Will's shirt, her hands sure, her face grown wiser than her years. Rose ran barefoot through the grass, her laughter rising clear as church bells. Jessie and Finn raced to the creek, fishing lines over their shoulders, calling bets and curses in equal measure. Ellie knelt in the garden, dirt streaking her face, showing Sadie a sprig of mint she'd coaxed from the rocky soil. Sadie was still there, her silver-streaked hair wound in a loose braid, teaching the children to read and shoot, to heal and forgive. Her small schoolroom had grown, drawing in kids from the hills, half wild, half hungry for a place to belong. At dusk, she told stories around the fire, legends of the Lakota, tales of brave women and men who'd chosen mercy over vengeance, hope over hate. Jonah's absence was a presence all its own, a coat left hanging by the door, a battered hat on a peg, a letter tucked in Abby's dresser, worn soft from rereading. He wrote now and then, never with promise of return, only with the same closing line, "Where you are, I am home." Ghost Hollow became a haven for the cast-off, the runaways, the broken and unbroken alike. New faces came, some stayed, some moved on, but the old scars bound them. The children grew tall, shoulders squared by hardship, but eyes bright with dreams. Finn built a forge, Jessie ran cattle, Ellie read poetry in the orchard, Will fixed fences and found time for mischief. Rose, gentle and steady, grew into the kind of strength that held everyone together without ever raising her voice. One autumn, as the leaves burned gold and the air smelled of rain, Abby stood on the porch and watched the children she'd once guarded with her life. She felt the ache of old fears loosen, replaced by a peace she hadn't known could last. She was still haunted by memories, fire, hunger, running in the night. But now they felt far away, like storms that had passed over the ridge and spent themselves. A traveler came one evening, dust on his boots, a child slung over his shoulder. No one asked his name. They simply offered bread, a bed, a place by the fire. He paid in gold and left a message with Sadie. "Tell them we're still free." As dawn broke, Abby found herself humming as she worked, the tune picked up by Ellie in the kitchen, by Finn at the forge. For a moment the world felt wide open and kind. No one here was perfect or untouched by pain, but no one was left behind. The fragile things, hope, forgiveness, love, had been guarded fiercely by the ones who'd once needed guarding most. And in Ghost Hollow, under the endless forgiving sky, they learned what freedom really was. Not just the right to go, but the blessing of having someone worth staying for. If this story touched something deep inside you, let us know. Just drop a 1 in the comments if you'd stand up for the fragile, or a 0 if you'd have walked away. And if you want to hear more Wild West tales where hope never quits, make sure to hit subscribe. Who knows, maybe the next story will remind you of someone you've lost, or someone you still protect.